My name is Sonia Campos Rivera. I serve as the Senior Vice President of Public Policy at Unite LA, and I'd like to welcome all of you to Unite LA's Education Means Business webinar, where again, we'll be focusing on the 24-25 proposed budget and learning about the implications for education and workforce. So I want to start today's conversation by thanking our partners, Valley Industry and Commerce Association and the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership. We're very thankful for your partnership and in sponsoring this webinar today. So thank you both for that. A little bit about Unite LA. Unite LA was founded in 1998. And we've established ourselves as a trusted intermediary dedicated to supporting the development of an effective local education and workforce development system so that all students, particularly those from historically marginalized communities, succeed in college, career, and beyond. Through the intersection of programming, policy, and systems change efforts, Unite LA works to increase access to high-quality early education, improve college and access and success, and develop pathways in high growth industries to ensure workforce readiness, especially for individuals who face structural and other barriers of employment. At Unite LA, we believe that equitable opportunities for education and workforce development are essential for creating a fair and just society. We understand that when opportunities are distributed equitably, all individuals have the chance to reach their full potential. So that's a little bit about Unite LA, and we're so excited again about today's panel because we're here to talk about how this budget that we're working on this year and the coming budgets are going to impact the families that I just alluded to, how our historically marginalized students and their families are going to be impacted by this year's budget and future budgets coming ahead of us. We know it's going to be a very challenging year, but we also trust that we have representatives that are doing their best to ensure that we're going to continue those key investments for these communities that need it most. So to kick us off today, it is my pleasure to introduce one of Unite LA's newest board members, Dr. Michael Olnick. He serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer at Child Care Resource Center, also known as CCRC, who will lead us into introducing Senator Portantino. So without no further ado, Dr. Olnick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sonia. It's nice to be in this position. Mike Olnick, I'm the President and CEO of the Child Care Resource Center and have been in this job for the last 20 years. We are the largest of the resource and referral voucher programs. We also do direct services, including preschool, Head Start, home visiting, a lot of workforce development work for the child care community, including apprenticeship programs at community colleges. And we do mental health. We serve about 50,000 children and 30,000 families in a 22,500 square mile area. And I'm pleased to say that we represent the west end of Senator Portantino's 25th Senate District, the Glendale, Burbank, Disney, that whole area that you serve, Senator. So I'm happy to welcome today's Senator, our Speaker, our Senator and Chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Anthony Portantino. He represents California's 25th Senate District, which stretches along the 210 freeway from Sunland to Hunga to Upland. He represents the Rose Bowl, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Griffith Park, Warner Brothers, Disney, Caltech, Claremont Colleges, and also our office in Sunland. In addition to previously chairing the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Portantino also sits on the Select Committee to foster trade between California, Armenia, and ARTSAC. Supporting public education, mental health, and sensible gun control have been priorities for the senator during his time in office. His accomplishments include increasing funding for special education, K-12 local control funding formula, and he's been a really big advocate for the early childhood community as well. He's authorized legislation that created California's umbilical and cord blood collection program, pushed back school start times for middle and high school, banned the open carry of handguns on Main Street, California, raised the purchase of age of firearms to 21, and placed the suicide hotline number on student identification cards. Prior to his years as a representative, he spent many years working in film and television production, served on the California Film Commission, and spent nearly 8 years on the La Cañada Flint Ridge City Council with 2 terms as mayor. So, Senator, I hope I didn't botch your bio too badly, and we're pleased to have you join us today.
It's too long of a bio. We need to cut that down. So I appreciate you, Michael. Thank you very much for having me in Unite LA. I'm very pleased to be on this webinar today and to share a little bit of thoughts about workforce development and the state budget and our economy. As you all know, California faces a lot of challenges. I mean, we're a large state with a very diverse population, and one of the things that's always concerned me is making sure we put in an emphasis on workforce development, on community colleges, on post high school opportunities for our young people. Back in 1950, when you graduated high school, you had a degree that was commensurate with a middle-class job. You could work at the GM factory or work on a farm and, make a living to be part of the middle class. When you graduate high school today, the world is much more complex and you need many more skills and expertise and education. You don't necessarily need a 4-year degree, but you need more than what's provided during high school. And it's always concerned me that some businesses look at our overall workforce readiness and make decisions about whether they're going to locate in California or not based on our workforce preparedness. And so those are issues that have always concerned me and always been part of my priorities as a legislator. I know we're going to do some specific Q&A about some of those proposals, but I think it's important that we look at those impacts in particular on our underrepresented communities. You mentioned my background in film and television. We just extended the entertainment tax credit for 5 years, which I had negotiated with the governor to do. And part of that was diversity efforts to make sure that the studios and the productions truly do reach out and try to make sure that core California industry reflects the diversity of California's workforce. And so that was something that Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo and Senator Marielena Durazo were adamant about. And I'm pleased that the governor responded, and that's part of that next 5-year plan going forward as we continue to bring those film jobs in California. With that, I'll take some Q&A, which I think is the next thing up.
Thank you so much, Senator. And I will be facilitating our part of the discussion. And I do want to start, Senator, just by thanking you for your leadership. Unite LA has had the great honor of working with you since your assembly days. So we've been monitoring, tracking, supporting a lot of the work that you've done. And I just want to really acknowledge that, we recognize all the good work that you've done and the hard work that you've been really committed to from the Great Recession to now, right? Even before the Great Recession, your leadership has been instrumental and has really helped move the needle to help improve the quality of life for many Californians, not just Angelinos in your district, but throughout the state. So definitely want to start by thanking you for your leadership. So one of the questions that I'd love to just get you started with, Senator, is, let's start positive. What items of the January budget are you or were you most excited about that you'd like to ensure are maintained in the final budget?
Well, thank you, Sonia, and I appreciate your kind words, and it's been a wonderful partnership. And you don't get anything done in the political world without having collaborations. And I like to say there are 2 kinds of leaders. There's I leaders and we leaders. And you get a lot more done when you work in the we space than in the I space. And so I appreciate the opportunity to collaborate. And I think that's what's exciting me about the budget. The governor shares a passion for kids like I do. He's a dad, I'm a dad. And we were able to partner on a couple of things that I think are going to make a significant difference to California's population. Dyslexia screening is in the budget. Resources to screen all first graders of dyslexia risks. And as you know, there's a huge social justice disparity. If you're, a suburban parent, you've got the pediatrician on speed dial. And on Tuesday, if there's a reading challenge in your first grader. But there's a lot of hardworking parents, a lot of single income parents, a lot of English learner families, a lot of folks with challenges that don't necessarily have that relationship with their pediatrician and are busy living their lives and don't necessarily see the reading risks of their kids early on when it's imperative to get early intervention. And so in my own case, my mom was a single mom, didn't find out that I was a dyslexic till the 8th grade. There's a study out of Texas that had 7 out of 10 inmates in a particular prison were dyslexic. And so California was one of only 12 states that was not screening for the risk of dyslexia in 1st grade. And many, many kids, and particularly English learner kids, were getting misclassified and put into special ed when all they have is a reading issue. And if you intervene early, you can help them become readers. And so now going forward, that's going to be done. And the governor, took 3 years, but it's in this year's budget. The other issue that we got in the budget is on behavioral health. We know before the pandemic that our teenagers were struggling. And now we know post-pandemic that significant number of high school students think about suicide. And, the risks are real. And school personnel are not all trained to see the risks, to identify the challenges that kids are faced. And so the governor committed to put in the budget this year resources to train all school personnel to see the warning signs of suicide. And one of the witnesses that always testifies that breaks my heart is the father of a 14-year-old daughter who comes and shares the story of how she turned in her English assignment, which was her journal, got an A on the English assignment, and then 2 weeks later took her own life. And he says, I'm not mad at the teacher for not seeing the warning signs in the journal because the teacher wasn't trained to see the warning signs. But going forward, we need to make sure that school personnel see the warning signs, not to provide the behavioral health treatment, but to direct a student to the right resource to get that help. And so both of those things were in the budget, and that makes me particularly pleased that the governor put those in. And as you know, when the governor puts it in the budget, it happens. And so I'm excited by those 2 proposals.
It's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Senator. And you're absolutely right. I think when we think about school climate, all the issues that our teachers, our school leaders are facing and trying to support our youth, I'm happy to hear that they're at least seeing the state's support in investments and providing them with the resources and tools, because it's not an easy job. You can have all the tools necessary, but when you're dealing with these students that come with so many challenges,
Right.
It's incredibly difficult to support. So it's nice to see that the state continues to invest in these critical resources. And congratulations again on the dyslexia efforts. I know that there was some key investments also last year when you addressed
Right.
the Real Coalition last year.
Right.
That was something that we had talked about, and the business community was monitoring and supporting this effort as well. So I'm pleased to see that, again, the continuity of these investments continues.
Yeah, real quick, one thing that that's still outstanding is the IEP translation. We're still struggling to get that through the system. There is a little pushback. And, again, think about being a family that doesn't speak English with a special needs child, and you get the IEP and it's in English. How do you advocate for your kid if you can't read the document and you don't get a translation for 4 or 5 months? You don't get kindergarten back. You don't get 1st grade back. You don't get, you lose half a year, it's devastating to the long-term success of that child. And so we're trying to get those IEPs translated in a more timely manner. And again, in the top 8 languages, it's not germane to any one language, because again, California has such a rich, diverse population. We need to make sure that whatever language is spoken in the household, that those parents can advocate for the kids. So that's a challenge that's still outstanding that we're fighting to get through.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that, Senator. So let's talk a little bit about how now the reality of the budget that we're currently facing, right? The governor unveiled his January budget. The LAO is also dropping some numbers, and we're seeing some significant gaps. How are you and your colleague legislators preparing for the projected budget deficit as it pertains to education and workforce? We've seen the LAO make a couple of recommendations of different things to trim to try to close that gap, but would love to hear your thoughts on what we're envisioning right now with your colleagues.
I think the May revision is going to be better. So I think one of the strategies we're all using is in this case hope and faith that the receipts issue by the federal government delaying receipts and California delaying receipts, part of the deficit is a little artificial. It's more of a function of accounting than actual dollars. The deficit's real, don't get me wrong, but I think it's going to be a little bit better just based on accounting receipts timing in May than it was in January. So there's that piece. The other piece of it is the legislature and the governor have worked very closely over the past 5 years to make sure that we had a sizable rainy day fund, that we were positioned for this downturn. You know, we spent a significant amount of the one-time dollars during the good years, and that was something that Governor Brown perfected. Was when there was extra money, he didn't want to program it into ongoing issues. He would do it for one-time issues, and Governor Newsom kept that philosophy going. So even though we spent a significant amount of the surplus years, the good years, most of that was spent on one-time only projects, not continuing burdens on the budget. And so that was good. And then we also took time and effort and prioritized increasing our rainy day fund, increasing our reserves. And so, you know, that's put us in a better position to deal through the downtime. As you mentioned, there is the potential that we're going to be making, you know, hard cuts. And, you know, when that happens, there's always the push and pull between education, between workforce development, between the safety net. So those conversations are gonna continue. You know, obviously in a perfect world, you don't pick on anybody and you spread it around fairly, so you're not hurting any one aspect of it. As you know, I've always been one to talk about the need to keep the investment in education, because it, you know, goes back to the old, you know, biblical story of, you know, if you teach somebody to fish, they're going to fish for the rest of their lives. And, you know, for the long-term stability of our economy and of the individual, you know, we should not be shortchanging education as well. But, you know, of course, the advocates for other aspects of our budget will make the legitimate plea of why their issues are important. And so, you know, that's why we're in the legislature, to make those decisions. But I think the problem is not going to be as big as everybody thinks it, or at least it started out to be. And I think we'll be as prudent with our reserves to backfill where those issues are that we don't want to cut. And then I think we'll make some good decisions. The other sort of change in the budgetary process that happened through COVID is the two houses worked very well together. Mm-hmm. You know, 6 years ago, that was not the case. The Assembly would do a budget, the Senate would do a budget, and the governor would do a budget. And there really wasn't a cohesive conversation until the very end of the process. And in the last, 4 or 5 years, the Senate and the Assembly have come together and created a legislative budget approach. And that unified approach has been much more beneficial to the overall process than having 3 legs of the stool. It's become the legislature as one body negotiating with the governor. And I think it's produced a better outcome than the 2 houses working independently of each other. And that's been a testament to the leadership of the 2 houses, that they recognized the imperative of working closer together. And that was not always the case. Yep. In a strange way, the old legislative leaders used to sort of pound their chest and take pride in the fact that they were going their own way, and made the distinction. And I always found it, silly that they would, posture more than they would lead. And, the current leadership has led more than posture.
Yeah, that's music to my ears on all ends that you mentioned. And a little bit of a sigh of relief, right? I don't know about you, Senator, but for me, there was a sense of urgency in getting all my family and friends to go file their taxes so we can get a clear picture of like what we were working with. So I think there's still that urgency, but I'm glad to hear that you're hopeful and optimistic that it's not going to be as tough. I'm going to take you back to the Great Recession years, if you don't mind. You might recall during the Great Recession, there were cuts across the entire education system, across the state, but early care and education was impacted significantly. I think out of all the segments, early care and education was just really suffered. California has rebounded nicely, I feel, as a result of your leadership and your colleagues' leadership and really prioritizing those areas that we needed to make significant cuts to. We've rebounded and we've seen some historical investments as it pertains to early care and education. How will this and future budgets continue to prioritize investments in early care and education? You know, we've made so much progress, and to your point, I know you're going to be leaving us in a little earlier than we had thought. So I would incorporate the audience questions into the remarks, Senator. You know, when we think about those one-time investments, we've seen probably that they're critical investments, and thinking about sustainability of some of these investments, not all the one time, but feeling that we might have learned something from these one-time investments. So that's the second part to the question. But as it pertains to early care and education, the recent historical investments, do you believe that this will be a trend that will continue?
So I think there's been a recognition over the importance of helping the youngest amongst us. You know, we know that brain chemistry, you know, changes as children get older. We know, you know, for example, the benefits of music education early in a child's development has critical, you know, benefits on math and other aspects of education. And so I do think there's been a recognition about how important early education is, just overall to the health and welfare of the child. And so I think that's going to continue to be a trend. You know, you're also correct in you know, when you do a one-time only expense, even though you say it, this is a one-time, you know, we parents know that too. When you hand a kid, you're only getting this $5 today. Don't come back next week. And of course, your child comes back next week and says, well, you gave it to me last week. And, you know, what part of one time didn't you think about? So I think there is a human nature aspect tied into, you know, this is great, and we would love to get it again next year. And I've even seen that with some of the members' requests that I put in, where, you know, I've told folks, hey, I was able to get you, you know, a small grant this year. You know, those folks come back again. Well, can I get it again next year? You know, not realizing, well, I'm going to have to give it to somebody else next year, you know, to spread the love around. But so I think it's the smart thing to do is to not tie us to ongoing expenditures. But B, there is always that expectation from those groups that it would continue. And so I think it's our job to articulate, you know, why it was one time. And I think the other part on their side is we can also learn from those, you know, if something is expanded or something is tried or something is piloted, you know, I think the legislature can always do a better job of learning from those pilot programs to see if things are something that warrant a sustainable commitment to, in particular, things that save us money. You know, if there's efficiencies out there, we have to get adept at, you know, legislating from a knowledge base. And I think one of the benefits of the extension in terms, you know, when I first got elected to the assembly, you know, it was the 6-year, you know, you were in the assembly for 6 years. And so the life cycle of a legislator was pretty determinate. You know, your first term, you were happy to be there and you learned. Your second term, you were, you know, rolled up your sleeves and tried to get things done. And then in your third term, you were looking for your next job. And so, you know, it distracted you. So in that 6-year life cycle of an assembly member, there was really only about a 3-year period where you were only focused on public policy. With the 12-year term, I think you see a lot more long-term planning from the legislators, a lot more stability. People always ask me, of the Schwarzenegger years, what was the best, most important reform? And I always point to that one because it did two things. It attracted a different group of people to the legislature, people who had careers, who were willing to take a chance on a 12-year career versus a 6-year career. So we got a different set of skill set of people who are willing to come to the legislature because of the stability that the 12 years brought. And it gave the legislature more of an ability to look long-term versus short-term. which is what the old legislature was much more short-term in its thinking. And so I think, in particular with the early focus on young people, you see legislators saying, you know what, we're going to see the benefit of that work. And so that's why it's taken on a greater priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say, I mean, the investments even before the pandemic around early care and education, dual language learners, we've seen them really stand out, right? And I'm going to shift to another question that came from the audience, the issue of teacher shortage. Two things, Senator. One, a recent California study demonstrates, and again, it's just the progress that we've made as a state in addressing equity and really breaking barriers for students of color, have seen that traditionally students or teachers with less experience tend to get placed in lower income communities, teachers with more experience in upper income communities. This study actually indicates that it's a much more level playing field, Senator. And I think it's a testament, again, of the investments and the intentionality of the leadership in Sacramento and, of course, the community at large. And obviously, there's still work to be done, but I wanted to call that out. It was just exciting to hear that that there's a much better balance now, where we're not seeing these gaps. Now, as we think about the credentialing, one of the questions that came up, and I apologize, I'm going to look at my phone, is what can we do to streamline the credentialing process to get teachers in the classroom? Again, as we talk about early care and education, we talk about dual language learners, STEM, math. How are conversations looking as it pertains to credentialing as an option?
Well, let me touch upon the first piece, and then I'll go into the credentialing. You're right. We've made great strides in trying to level the teacher, for lack of a better, quality quotient in different schools, and that actually goes back to my predecessor's predecessor, Jack Scott. I think when he was in the Assembly, did a bill where he talked about how the teachers that were rated the worst ended up in the schools that needed the best. And he did legislation to try to stem that. And we've seen the benefits of his work. And so I want to give some props to Jack Scott, who, took on a lot of the institutions that didn't want to go there and was able to get that legislation through. And I think it's made a difference. And I always tell my own personal story. My first grade teacher was an African-American woman named Mahalia Atchison. And I remember, when Martin Luther King was killed, her talking to us as first graders about what that meant to her. And I remember her talking about him to us like it was yesterday, and the pain in her eyes and what it meant to her as a Black first grade teacher to lose, a hero in real time. I'll never forget that. And so, there is such power in making sure that those who teach us reflect the community. And, here I am, 5 decades later, still impacted by her as my first grade teacher. And so that's why it's just not rhetoric. It's important that we're making sure that our classrooms have the interests of a broad perspective. And that's why, frankly, not to sound partisan, the folks who want to stop us from appreciating differences just have it all wrong. And we need to appreciate the differences of our people and make sure that our workforce reflects that. The second question, the teacher shortage itself. I did a bill years ago that said if you were a physicist, you can teach physics in high school, and let the local district come up with a system to make the decision of whether you can teach, and got significant pushback. If you were teaching at the community college, you were teaching calculus at a community college, I said, and if your local high school had a shortage of calculus teachers, you should be able to teach calculus. If that school, leaving it up to the school district to decide whether you could teach, and got significant pushback from the institution to not want to leave it to the local districts to make those sort of self-determinate decisions. And I found that very unfortunate. We even had a situation where the governor had to declare an emergent, that there was an emergency. We tried to put in some safeguards to make it easier for folks in the STEM fields to come and teach. And the institution just wouldn't. It was too radical, which I find sort of, strange that it's too radical that if you're a physicist that you could teach physics. That's a radical idea. We did settle on a during COVID, I was able to get a bill through the system to allow school districts to share teachers. So and I always use Monrovia and Duarte as an example, those two high schools are very close to each other. And so if Monrovia has extra seats in their calculus class, a Duarte student, the school districts can create their own relationship. They don't have to, prior to my bill, they'd have to go to the county to get the blessing and there would be all kinds of funding craziness. What my bill said is the local school districts can work it amongst themselves, how they want to do it. So if one school has an extra seat in a calculus class, they can share it with the other school, and they work out the money. That the state and the county doesn't have to be involved in the conversation. And that could be an online class or an in-person class. And so we were able to get that through to share resources. And what brought that to my attention, again, was during COVID, the immersion classes were getting cut because there weren't enough, for example, 7th grade Spanish speaking math teachers. And so immersion was getting significantly cut. And I said, well, wait a minute, let's see if we can. So if school A has a Spanish speaking math teacher and school B doesn't, they can work out the sharing of resources. And obviously, I did the bill to make it easier for retired teachers to unretire and come back to teach. And that bill faced opposition as well, which again is counterintuitive. And I scratch my head on some of these things. But the superintendent, Tony Thurman, made it a top priority of his, and we were able to get that, again, working collaboratively with his office, we were able to get that through into the system.
Yeah. I know you need to head out, Senator. You gave us until 10:35. I want to be respectful of your time. But again, those are just beautiful examples of the creativity that's required to get the work done. The truth is, like you said earlier, our students are going to be 5, 8, 10, only once. And if we get caught up on the red tape, it's going to make it incredibly problematic. And we're going to not see the results that we're hoping for. So I thank you for your creativity, your leadership, and we wish you the best in these next couple of negotiation weeks. And we're prepared to support in whatever way is possible. Thank you for your time and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Sonia. Be well, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Senator. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So just so glad to have the senator and those remarks come directly from him to really share what we should be seeing and expecting the next couple of weeks. We know it's not going to be smooth sailing, but again, having leaders like the senator make me feel a little bit more at ease. So let's transition then to our next speaker. Jason Sisney. Jason is a friend of Unite LA. He is the budget advisor for Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas and the Assembly Democrats. He represents the speaker at the staff level in budget negotiations with staff of the governor and the state Senate. Prior to joining the Assembly in 2018, Jason was an executive at the State Legislative Analyst Office, focusing on tax policy, economic forecasting, and public pensions. Prior to joining the LAO, he worked as a credit analyst, in the municipal bond market in New York and as an aide to the governor in his native West of Virginia. With no further ado, I'll hand it over to Jason. Thank you, Jason, for being with us today, and I'll give you the floor.
Sure. Hello, and thank you for having me. And we're here to talk about the state budget, and the state budget is negotiated each year between the two houses of the legislature, the Assembly and the Senate, and the governor. And I think that, going to what Senator Portantino said, one of the things that unites the two houses of the legislature with Governor Newsom is a shared commitment to improving our education system, all the way from early care up to higher education, and also to improving the workforce programs that the state funds with local and private partners to give more Californians opportunity. And during the last few years, there have been a lot of spending resources put into those areas as the state budget has grown and as the state has been recovering from the pandemic. School funding rose to a record high, and we put a lot more funding into early care and education, not as much as people would like, but a lot more than was there before, and trying to rebuild that system after prior cutbacks, more than a decade ago. The budget this year faces a lot of challenges. California taxes high income earners at much higher rates than ordinary working people. And our high income earners that pay the bulk of taxes to the state are concentrated in the tech industry in the Bay Area. Their incomes in the last year and a half have been significantly affected by changes in the technology sector, including the effects of higher interest rates on companies' ability to join, merge, and finance expansions. And as a result of those changes, the state's tax revenues have slowed considerably and dropped. And the governor put forward his budget proposal in January after we just learned a few weeks before that a significant revenue decline in 2023. The IRS delayed the tax deadlines for virtually all Californians. High income taxpayers took advantage of that. Many did not file their 2022 tax returns and make payments on 2022 taxes until last November. And when they did, we found out there was a lot less money coming from those sources than projected. The governor's budget identified, as they would count it in the administration, $38 billion deficit to correct this year. The LAO, which uses more traditional calculations, noted the governor really was addressing a $58 billion deficit, but it's a very big number. And since the governor made his budget proposal at the beginning of January, state revenues have declined significantly below projections. The Legislative Analyst Office, which serves both parties and both houses of the legislature, now estimates that for the 3-year period ending in 24-25, revenues are headed to be more than $20 billion below what the governor proposes. That's not a worst case scenario. It could get worse. It could get better, as Senator Portantino was hoping. But I think that the thing to keep in mind with this year's budget is that the governor in January was trying to preserve investments that had been made for the most part in early care and education, K-12, and higher education as well. He had a number of reductions and delays proposed to spending on workforce programs. But the governor will have to revise his budget before May, and those revisions are likely to be negative across the board. So virtually all areas of the budget are likely to have significant additional reductions and delays in the May budget. And if not in the May budget, then next year. I think that what my advice would be for folks who care about programs is during the spring, as legislators are considering the governor's proposal, it's really important to look ahead and think about what programs, what investments that the state is making that you value, and to make the case about why they're important to save in advance of the potential cut proposals that will be coming in May and potentially next year as well. So that would be my best advice, is that programs you care about, speak up, talk about why you care about them, why they should be prioritized, because there will be the need for additional, perhaps significant cuts in every area of state government, and that will mean that the governor and the legislature have to prioritize. So those are my remarks, and happy to take any questions from there.
Thank you, Jason. I love that recommendation. And I'd love to just do a follow-up question before I jump into our audience questions. Similar to what I had asked the senator, in the last 2-3 years during these one-time investments, what do you feel we've learned as a result of these investments that you feel are important, or that the state will probably continue to invest in, right? Mental health, let's use that as an example. Right. We probably didn't invest in mental health nearly as much as we did pre-pandemic. we live in a different world where mental health issues are a big lift in California. Can you speak a little bit more to that? What aha moments have we experienced that you think the legislature and leadership are going to want to continue sustaining, for lack of a better word?
Mental health's a very good example. There's a broad recognition of the value of public spending in that area. Childcare is another example. And I think that one of the things that we've learned is that having the workforce ready to deliver those services to Californians in need is very difficult. We have, fairly low unemployment in the state. We have an aging workforce, and it is very challenging to grow the workforce to provide the services we need. Literally, how do we create more and qualified mental health care providers, teachers, early care workers, and so forth? That is very challenging. And so the legislature and the governor have been working on investments, be it through workforce programs, be it through higher education, be it through CTE programs, to help create the workers for the future in the industries that we need. And it's very challenging. It takes a long time. And it's probably more challenging given the fact that we have an aging population and we have relatively low unemployment in the state. So I think that would be my observation, that the state and the federal government have put a lot of effort into these worthy goals, and we want to continue them. But I think one of the challenges in common across most sectors is, where do we get those workers to do the work that we need?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to just kind of piggyback the apprenticeship question, similar to what I asked the senator. But before I go there, Jason, let me make a note of that before I forget. I do want to echo what you just shared earlier around early care and education. It feels like there's a sense of urgency in ensuring that we don't lose sight of the importance of early care and education and the impact that it has on California's economy. Normally when we think about the state budget, we, in the past, pre-pandemic, we've seen investments in infrastructure, in health, transportation, all important issues. But we never really had seen investments in childcare, early care and education, to ensure that parents and legal guardians are able to go into the workplace. So, that's something that I think about. I feel like even for business partners that we work with, that the pandemic unfortunately shed a lot of light. So turning a negative into a positive, we saw the importance of childcare to not only California's economy, but the nation. So just wanted to echo that piece that you that mentioned earlier. And then again, going into like the piece of apprenticeships, creative opportunities to try to get that workforce. I'll ask you the same question I asked the senator. We're in need of creative ways to support our higher ed institutions, our future workforce. Apprenticeship seems to be an interesting opportunity, as we think about teachers across the board. I wonder if you can speak to that. The senator gave a couple of examples of things he's done through legislation to try to help us increase our teacher workforce. I wonder if you can speak a little bit more to that.
Well, a lot of the state's programs that are funded in terms of high road training partnerships, in terms of apprenticeship programs, they really do represent partnerships between government, the private sector, and labor organizations as well. And so I think that the state has wanted to nurture those and grow them in recent years. And one of the things that will be tested in not just this year, but probably over the coming few years, if projections hold, is that we probably will have to trim them. And I think, like I was saying, the programs that people value, those are the ones that you need to talk to legislators about, because they working with the governor are going to face choices about priorities in the next year or two, given the deficit projections that we are seeing. And I think that the people who are closest to it in local communities who see the programs that work, you should let your legislators know about the ones that work, and let the governor know as well.
Yeah. A follow-up question to that, Jason, that I'm reading and I haven't filtered is, what impacts, if any, do you anticipate the budget deficit will have on workforce development funding for adult apprenticeship programs for vulnerable populations? specifically around reentry population. Not sure if you're comfortable speaking to that.
I'm a big picture guy on the budget, so I confess I don't know the details of what the governor's proposal is in that area. But I do just offer the advice that the deficit situation we face is quite serious. And while we do have significant rainy day funds where, if we wanted to, we could probably, do very little in terms of budget cutting this year, it would just mean there would be more budget cutting next year. So within the next year or two, really, any program in state government could be affected by these cuts. Mm-hmm. And I think that the thing with the reentry programs is that the state, both because courts have forced the state to do so, but also through the decisions of the legislature and voters, we've aimed to reduce our prison population. We want to keep reducing the prison population. Reentry programs are so key to that, to give ex-offenders a chance to thrive. And so there's definitely a desire to make those programs, which often have very high, positive outcomes relative to the money spent. I think there's a desire to keep those going. But again, legislators and the governor will need to hear about how important they are as they make these choices over the next few years.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for allowing me to throw that question in there, because it came up in the chat. It was a really good one. I am trying to fold questions that are coming up into conversation, and I'm going to try my hardest, audience, to incorporate all the questions. And apologies in advance if I'm unable to. I wonder, Jason, if you can speak a little bit more to the impacts on the higher education system. We've talked a lot about the importance of early care and education, a little bit about opportunity youth. Can you speak a little bit more to what we're envisioning final outcomes are going to look for as it pertains to higher education systems?
Well, the governor working with the university systems has proposed for several years now stable increases in state funding for university operations, which allow the universities to plan their annual tuition increases increasingly in advance. The state also has been providing facility funding. Higher education funding is an area of the state budget, though, that historically is cut when there are big revenue downturns. And so that's something that will have to be considered. In the governor's budget, he basically delays a previously planned increase to both university systems in the 24-25 fiscal year, and then pledges essentially double up in the 25-26 fiscal year. With the deficit worsening, it will be very hard to actually achieve that goal. In addition, the state had previously appropriated hundreds of millions of dollars, planned to appropriate more funding for student housing as well as other university facilities. The governor's plan cuts some of those funding, and some other cuts are likely in the future. So while the state has put a lot of funding into higher ed recently, especially to increase the number of California seats in our university systems, we likely are looking ahead at a few years where that growth is going to be very difficult to sustain, and the universities will face potentially some difficult fiscal decisions in terms of, do they have to reduce their staffing? How do they deal with a slowing increase of state funds? And so it is going to be challenging, and that's one that the universities will, I'm sure, be advocating very strongly to minimize their cuts over the next few budgets.
Yeah, thank you. As we wrap up, Jason, I wonder if you can bring that forecast of what the next couple of years look like. We know that recessions, this is just, this is part of life. We have some surpluses, some recessions, and it's a roller coaster. How long do you think where California is going to be experiencing this type of a budget climate? Do you think it'll be 2 years, 3 years? Speak a little bit to what the next couple of years look like in your mind.
Well, I think the good news is that essentially what we had was a slowdown in our tech economy, which has the bulk of our high income taxpayers. That started in mid-2022. I think that by and large conditions have now stabilized in the tech sector, but they are not. But but the influx of tax revenue that we see is not growing strongly from that low. So we are not seeing a lot of growth, even though the situation is stabilized. Meanwhile, for lower and middle income people in the state, while they face challenges with high prices and the cost of living, incomes have grown reasonably well among those groups, including with increases in the minimum wage. And so tax revenues from those groups are growing. But as I mentioned earlier, California gets most of its tax revenues from high income people that it taxes at a higher rate. So the good news is that I do think things have stabilized from the slowdown that happened from mid 2022 through recent months. But we are not seeing a lot of growth. And what that means is if it continues, the state does have rainy day funds. They surely will be deployed this year and perhaps next year to help soften the blow. But there still, after that, would be a need for tens of billions of dollars of reductions in ongoing spending from state programs or increases in tax revenue, which are very difficult to get agreement on. Keep in mind, while the voters of California have placed significantly higher tax rates on high income people in the state, it's precisely that group where we are seeing the weakness in our tax revenue. Not only is the tech sector had challenges, but we are seeing, at least as of 2022, we are seeing net migration out of the state of our wealthiest taxpayers. Part of that's because of the pandemic and remote work. We don't know yet whether that's a continuing trend, but if it is, it will mean a challenge that becomes even deeper over the next few years because those high income earners are very important to our state and local budget system. So not a lot of great news at the moment, but I do think that above all, the voices of people in communities who care about these programs, fundamentally, budgeting is about making choices. Our leaders will face some choices, and you can have a say in telling them what you think the choices should be when they pick one priority over another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say too, Jason, I feel like it is important to also acknowledge, I mean, with all the challenges, thinking about those positive things that, we're dealing with. And one that I would like to call out is just the progress we've made on per pupil spending in California, right? I think that's such a big deal. If you look at the numbers, and you know these better than I do, but in the governor's January budget press conference, he did a comparable of like, I forget if we was like at $14,000 per pupil back in maybe 2008. I'm making up numbers here, and now like at maybe to 22,000 per pupil in just a number of years. We have to applaud that. Yes, we should have been there. We should have been making those investments a long time ago. But the fact that we are getting to those numbers, I feel like it's important to call that out and not lose sight of those wins.
Yeah, in the past, I'm looking at a chart now, and in terms of our inflation-adjusted state and local spending, there are different ways to look at K-12 spending. But in terms of inflation-adjusted K-12 spending from state and locals through our main funding mechanism, Proposition 28, inflation-adjusted spending since 2011 has nearly doubled. And so California has risen in the ranks from the very bottom of per pupil funding to the upper half. And we'll see if that can be sustained over the next few years. But there clearly has been enormous progress in terms of funding. And I think that we have other challenges as the teacher shortage that we talked about earlier. But I think that the state's leaders have tried to do that well. And all the while, we've been building reserves, not just for our general state budget, but we have a reserve for school funding as well. That's one of the things that will help ease the potential reduction on classroom funding this year. We'll be using those reserves that we've built up all the while.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I know we're almost at time. Just any closing thoughts? You have in front of you, folks you can't see, a combination of community leaders, business leaders, education leaders, advocates. What would be your biggest advice to such a diverse group of partners? And you already did share some already, really go out there and advocate for what you feel is most important. So building on that, what would be your last thoughts, your closing thoughts on what's ahead of us and how we should prepare?
Well, California thrives when the LA area thrives. And I think that all of you all who are listening here today are really about helping LA area youth and workers and businesses thrive. And that's really, I think, what members of both parties and the governor are interested in as well. And so I think that, bringing your opinions to bear, whether it's sending emails, writing letters, coming up to Sacramento to attend a hearing, visiting with your local legislators when they're in your districts in LA. Those are all very important things to make your voice heard. The leaders do not have unlimited funds in the budget. They will have to make choices. They won't please everyone, but really encourage you to let your opinions be known, because that's how the process is supposed to work.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, we definitely have the work cut out for us. You have your work cut out for you and folks in the assembly as well. It's just one of those areas where, we'll be monitoring closely, and again, prepared to roll up our sleeves, Jason, weigh in where possible. But this group here really appreciates your time and your leadership, really, in taking the bull by the horns, for lack of a better word, during these very challenging times. And again, we'll get past it. We had the Great Recession, which feels like it was just a couple of years ago, and it's been a while. So I trust that we'll get past that. And just last thoughts for me, what would you say, Jason, are the biggest differences from the Great Recession to what we're dealing with now, and in terms of process and overcoming?
Here at the state level, California enters this budget downturn with record reserves and record cash. I was involved in the state's response to the Great Recession, and 15 years ago, in December 2008, the state essentially had to do a sudden stop of tens of billions of dollars of capital projects and other programs. It wasn't just that we faced a problem in balancing our annual budget, which we did, but the state literally had no cash. But we go into this downturn actually with record amounts of cash, record amounts of reserves that we've saved up. That will not fix all our problems, but it means that we do have more of an opportunity to make the fiscal adjustments that are needed with some deliberation. We don't necessarily have to rush into them, and there's an opportunity to consider the ramifications. So that's a real big difference, and that happens because the leaders of California and the voters made the decision that we didn't want to have that kind of situation in the Great Recession again. We didn't want to go into an economic downturn or budget downturn with nothing in the bank. This time we do have things in the bank, and that's helpful.
That was a beautiful ending, Jason. Thank you so much for that. We want to thank you for your time. Thank everyone that's joined us for today's webinar for your time as well. And we will be sending out a follow-up email with this link and future dates for upcoming webinars. Jason, thank you. And everyone else, have a great Valentine's Day. And you guys all have a great day. Thank you so much.